Welcome to part 2 of our 3-part video series on NWEA. Today, this video will focus on RIT scores and the information that you're going to receive on individual students. And then we're going to dig into the class report and talk about how it can be used to help make instructional decisions. To get started, we all give the NWEA MAP assessment. And I want to let you know that MAP is actually an acronym, and it stands for Measure of Academic Progress. The word progress is pretty important here because this is what we get from the fall and the winter to the spring on every individual. We get to see the progress that they make and the growth that they show from fall to winter to spring. So that happens through the year. This is also known as through the year data that can help guide our instructional decisions. It's different than a summative assessment that focuses on mastery. This assessment with the progress through the year is going to focus on student readiness. The scores that we receive from the NWEA MAP assessment are known as RIT scores. And this too is an acronym, and it talks about readiness. And RIT stands for Ready for Instruction Today. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at RIT scores and looking at the tables and the charts and thinking about how we can use that information to make those decisions and how we can go meet the student where they are based on their readiness. So to get started, we want to look at the charts. We want to look at the tables with the RIT scores and talk about normed data and what that means. If you do not have your RIT tables at any point in time, this is just a little tip that I used when I used NWEA in the building. Sometimes I would have to go Google, and so I just want to let you know that you can do that. You can Google NWEA normative data. You want to find the PDF document with the title 2020 NWEA MAP Growth Normative Data Overview. And your RIT tables are found on page 3. I kept these handy in the front cover of an assessment binder and didn't go far without them. There are actually 4 tables, and I've just taken a screenshot of the first 2. You see here reading and math. The other tables are language usage and science. If you notice that every grade level is in the chart, and then the data changes from fall to winter to spring. The data here is normed data. So what that means is NWEA took all of the students that took the test that were kindergartners, for example, we'll start there, and took the fall assessment. And they lined up all their scores and they take the average. That's why the word mean is there. The mean and the 50th percentile, because the sample size is so large, are very close to the same. They're very close to being the same number. So you'll notice in the charts for 2020, it now says mean and SD. SD is the standard deviation. The number 136.65 is the RIT score for it's the RIT average score for a kindergartner that took the test in the fall. So a lot of times we think about using the word average. Just remember, this is the average. Some kindergartners had a much higher RIT. Some kindergartners had a lower RIT. This is the average. So we're going to have to talk about how to use this table. We're going to go in and we're going to look at individual students, and we're going to really talk about what it tells us about their readiness and where they are. I want to start with Nick. Here's Nick. Nick is in the 3rd grade. It's the end of the year 3rd grade. So he's taking the spring assessment, and he scores a 197 on his language usage. We want to go to the language usage chart. So you can see I have the language usage chart here in the screen. And the way we're going to use it to determine his readiness is we're going to find the number anywhere on the chart. It doesn't have to be in the spring column. We're going to look for the number that is the absolute closest to 197 anywhere in the chart. in order to determine what Nick is ready for. Remember, these are RIT scores. So anytime we think about their RIT score, we're going to use the word ready. I hope you see this 197.33 and that's the closest number to 197 on the chart. That means that Nick is ready for beginning of the year 4th grade. It's the end of the year 3rd grade, and he's ready for beginning of the year 4th grade. That tells us that Nick is right on track. We're in really good shape. He's ready to start 4th grade. I do want to point out that if you look at the spring assessment for the spring assessment for 3rd grade, you do see 198.3, which is a little bit higher than 197. But if you notice, and this happens in most of the grade levels, the end of the year of one to the beginning of the year of the next, there is a little bit of a drop. Remember that normed data is just what the students did. So they just take how they performed and they find the average. So this actually represents what students did on the assessments, which tells us that there really is a little bit of a summer slide. We know that. We know that there's a little bit of a summer slide. However, 197 is still very close to 198. So we could also say that Nick is ready for end of the year 3rd grade. And it is end of the year 3rd grade. So again, he is on track. He is in a good place to continue on and go on with the progression. I just suggest that you just find the number that is the absolute closest and use that as your reference for what Nick is ready for. And 197.3 is closer. So we're going to think, well, you know what? He's ready for beginning of the year 4th grade. Let's meet Tommy. Tommy's a little bit of a different situation. Tommy's also in the 3rd grade, but it is now December, and he's going to be taking the mid-year NWEA map. And he takes the reading assessment, and he scores a 150. We're going to go to the chart. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to find the number that is the closest to 150 as we can get. And we see 153.09. So this tells us that Tommy is ready for end of the year kindergarten in reading. He is in mid-year. He's in the December month of his 3rd grade year. So there's a gap here. Tommy is probably feeling pretty frustrated. You can see Tommy in the picture. He looks a little frustrated. And that can come out in many different ways. This could look like a behavior situation. If Tommy is sitting in 3rd grade with his 3rd grade peers, but he's actually ready for end of the year kindergarten, he might be acting out in class. He might be, showing out. He might be just trying to he doesn't want to be called on to read, I'm sure. So he might do something to draw the attention in a different way. The other thing that could happen is Tommy could be a complete introvert. He may not want any attention whatsoever. So it could be that Tommy might appear to be lazy. It could be that Tommy appears to be unmotivated, and it could be that Tommy just appears to be a behavior problem. When in reality, when we have this data and we have this information, now we see that there's an academic deficiency, and some of those things may make sense when we have this information. I know that there's a reason behind it if Tommy's actually ready for the end of the year kindergarten in reading. He has some very basic foundational skills that are not there, that he needs to be addressed. He needs interventions right away. He needs some help, some support. So we learned a lot about Tommy. Let's look at Jordan. Jordan's in the 6th grade. It's the beginning of the year. He just started 6th grade. He takes his map assessment and he scores a 227 in math. So we do the same thing. We go to the chart. We find the number that's the absolute closest to 227. And we see this 226.73. And what it tells us is that Jordan is ready for end of year 7th grade math, in math. He's sitting at the beginning of 6th grade. Now, this does not mean that Jordan's 6th grade math teacher has to go and teach Jordan 7th grade standards from the end of the year. That's not what that means. It gives the 6th grade math teacher information about Jordan for 6th grade math. Jordan is going to need some enrichment. He's going to need to go a little deeper. Might give him some choices as like, do you want to maybe make a presentation? Do you want to help students? You know, we might utilize him in the classroom in other ways so that Jordan doesn't get bored. Because if Jordan gets bored, guess what his behavior could look like? It could look very similar to Tommy's behavior. He could start acting out, and maybe he's an introvert, and maybe he and Tommy are best friends and they do cause all the trouble together, right? It could look that way too. So having this information helps explain a lot about an individual student. And we know by the beginning of 6th grade that we need to make some instructional decisions for Jordan that might look different than a student sitting in that same classroom in the beginning of year 6th grade that might be ready for beginning of the year 2nd grade math. And they may be in the same classroom. So having this information is very helpful on the individual level. It can explain a lot, and it can help us figure out what to do next. And if you think back to part 1, when we talked about ESSA and our growth score, we talked about how the hardest students to get to grow a lot of the time, that these are the advanced students. So we have to make sure that Jordan grows. We have to ensure that he grows for his readiness. So there's a lot there. There's a lot of information there in just one RIT score on these students from one assessment each. We're going to dig in to the class report today, though. I want to start by looking at your class as a whole. So when we do this, we go to teach.mapnwea.org and log in. Once you've logged in, this is the screen you should see. And in this blue column right here, I always call this the blue banner. In the blue banner on the bottom, you see view reports. And I hope you notice that there's a drop-down arrow, because when you click on view reports, you get some options. You can go to map growth reports, operational reports, or reports key. We're going to go to map growth reports. When we click on the map growth reports, we will all of a sudden have these little thumbnail pictures of reports that we can pull along with the report name. You're going to click on the word class report. This is the report we're going to focus on today to see how we can use this and the information that we have available. When you go into the class report, you have to give the system some information. You're going to have to tell it what term was rostered and term tested that you want to pull. I'm going to pull the data from the winter 2021 assessment. Rostered and tested will be the same. If you have multiple classes, you might have to check which class period that you want. I'm only going to look at reading today. You may want to look at something other than reading. You may want to look at language usage. You may want to look at science. You may want to go into math. I'm going to go into reading. I think that this is very helpful information for all teachers of that student to know they're reading. Down here under report options, the default is fine. You don't have to change anything under the report options. Now, when these things are all checked, you'll have a little button at the bottom that will allow you to create a PDF. When we create the PDF, this is page 1 of the class report. This is what you should see. Now I have a little graphic organizer that is going to be included where the video is provided in our portal. There'll be the video, this PowerPoint, and a graphic organizer. I've shared the link to the graphic organizer here on this page, and we're going to go through the pieces, but I want you to feel free to change it and make it your own. If there are things you want to add, if there's other information, different sections, and if there are things you want to take away, that's perfectly fine. It's yours. When you get it, make a copy and use it how it best suits you. I just want to show you how we can pull the information and use it to make some decisions. So what you see here again is page 1 of the class report, and then this is the beginning of that graphic organizer that I have supplied in the portal. We're going to start right up here at the very top, and you see it says page 1. We're going to start by looking at the class mean RIT. I want to know, how is this class performing as a whole? How is the group of students doing all together? If you notice that there's this red arrow over here on page 1, it's pointing to this box with the gray and white shaded rows. You can go through and look to see how many students were tested. There were 23 students tested. And the second row says mean RIT. The mean RIT for my class is a 199.6. So that's what I'm going to put here in this box. I'm going to write 199.6. But then I need to really think about, what is this group scoring like? I'm going to go back to my reading chart. I'm going to find the number that is closest to 199.6. And I find that this group is scoring like mid-year 4th grade. Now that's really good news, because this is a 3rd grade classroom. This was the winter assessment for 3rd grade. They're scoring like mid-year 4th grade. The class as a whole. So the average, that's the average, some are scoring better, some are scoring lower. But average, the class as a whole, is scoring like mid-year 4th grade. If I look here in the next section, I want to do some comparison. I want to know, what is the norm grade level RIT? So again, back to this chart, second row up from the bottom, you see norm grade level mean RIT. This is the number from the chart. It should correspond with the number, since this is a 3rd grade class and it's the winter assessment. It should correspond with the mean in the winter for 3rd grade in that chart. So this is basically telling you what's in the chart, and I'm going to write down 193.9. This is a 199.6. This is a 193.9. And since that is more than 3 points higher, it is a measurable difference. So when I compare my group to the norm, since it's beyond those 3 points, so 3 points higher or 3 points lower is significant, then I would say that my class is performing significantly higher than the norm as a whole. This is good information. I may find that my class is performing significantly lower than the norm. I may find that my class is performing like the norm. It tells me how the whole group is all together. Now, the next section, we're going to look at these colored bands down here in the overall performance. Something about NWEA that I think is really helpful is their color coding system. Red always means the same thing. Red is always low, and it always means less than the 21st percentile. Now, we talked in the normed data about the mean and the 50th percentile being very, very close to being the same number because the sample size is so large. But either way, another word for mean is average, and another word for 50th percentile is also average. So if we think about below the 21st percentile, if we think 50th percentile is average, then below the 21st percentile is very low. And that will always be indicated here in red. No matter what report you go to, red will mean low. below the 21st percentile. It's important for us to know that we have one student in this band. So we're going to put 1 right here. We're going to look at the low average section, and I see 5 students. I'm going to put 5. I see that I have 3 in the average range, which is the 41st percentile to the 60th. I have 3. Green is high average. I have 8. And high is always greater than 80%, and it's always blue. So blue means the same thing. Green always means the same thing. Yep, all the colors never change. So if I look at this, I might realize I have 14 of my 23 students are in the high average high range. I have 6 students that are in the low average range. Now, I don't know these students. This is Francis Barnes' classroom. I don't know them, but what I do know, and I feel very safe in saying, is that a student that scores greater than the 80th percentile, a student that is high and scoring greater than the 80th percentile, and a student that is low and scoring less than the 21st percentile, they don't need the same thing. But they're sitting in the same classroom, right? Students go to 3rd grade because they're 8 years old. So when they come to us, we have a range of abilities in the classroom, and we need to know what that range looks like. And that's what we're doing here. We're deciding how many we have in each one of these bands, so we can start to begin making some instructional decisions. I know for sure these 6 students here do not need the same thing that this student here needs. And I'll take it one step further. Students that score below the 21st percentile, whatever we have been doing for them is not working. It's just not working. We have to come up with something a little different for this student here, and probably can pull some students here and put them really in the same category. Someone that scores at the 21st percentile can probably be put in this same group with this student here, or someone at the 22nd percentile. They probably have very similar needs. So we can start to think about some grouping in this situation. Now, this is page 1. You have other information here. You're given the median, you're given the standard deviation, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. Stars mean that it was less than 10. If it's less than 10, I cannot give you the information. And here at the norm grade level mean RIT, if this is ever a star, it usually means that you have more than one grade level in that class, and the system doesn't know which number you want them to pull from the chart. That happens a lot in high school. A lot of our high school sections will have stars there because you'll have multiple grade levels in one section. Okay, so this is page 1. We're going to go now to page 2, and we're going to take a look at what is different. So I hope you notice the chart looks the same. Your information up here is all the same. Your chart is the same. Here's that overall performance and the different number of students that are in every band. And now we have these other additional sections down here. These are the goal areas, or the areas that make up the reading assessment. So now I know that the reading assessment is going to give me information on vocabulary acquisition and use. It's going to give me information on their readiness in literature and their readiness in informational text. And now I can go through and I can look at where my students fall in each one. Here is where I want to focus on standard deviation. As classroom teachers, we know we have to differentiate, but sometimes we don't know how, when, we have other questions. And so since we have so much information that's provided from NWEA MAP assessment, I often suggest to teachers, let's eat this elephant one bite at a time. Let's focus on one thing so that we can learn how to do that on one topic. So my suggestion here, when you get to page 2, is to look at your standard deviation. So let's talk about standard deviation and what it even means. Standard deviation is going to tell you the spread, how spread out your data is. And so in terms of instruction, it's going to basically be giving us information on academic abilities in the room. A high standard deviation, NWEA considers a high standard deviation being anything greater than 14, means it's very academically diverse. And for a really academically diverse group, whole group instruction will not work. We need small group instruction. We need differentiation. We need to think about how can we target that task for that group. The other direction is a low standard deviation, would be something less than 10. If I have a standard deviation less than 10, then my group is pretty much performing the same. They're very similar in their academic abilities. If it's less than 10, whole group instruction is appropriate. So there's this gray area between 10 and 14. So what do we do? So with that being known, what I suggest to teachers is, regardless of what your standard deviations are, let's just practice that small group differentiating and targeting the tasks for, let's just start with one goal area. So we're going to pick the goal area with the highest standard deviation. Even though none of my standard deviations are higher than 14, I do see this 13.1. And so I'm going to say, you know what? I need my literature. I'm going to really focus on literature. I'm going to make sure whenever I do anything in my classroom that involves literature, I'm going to use small group instruction, and I'm going to differentiate the tasks. I'm going to make sure I go in and look at readiness and abilities, and I'm going to differentiate that task. So it gives me that starting point. So the graphic organizer then has this goal area here, and it says page 2, goal area with the highest standard deviation, the most academic diversity in the room. I need small group differentiation there. Goal areas where whole group instruction could be appropriate. That's when my standard deviation is less than 10. So here I'm going to write literature. So when I do literature with this class, when I work in literature, I'm going to use small group. And I really don't have any standard deviation less than 10. So I actually don't have any goal area where whole group instruction is appropriate. So I'm going to write none. It doesn't mean I'm still not going to use whole group instruction. It just gives me the information of where things are appropriate. Now we scroll down to page 3. And when we get to page 3, this is where we need a little bit of time, because now we see individual students. So let me tell you how page 3 is set up. All of your students are put in order from the lowest RIT to the highest RIT. So your very first student on the list is the student with the lowest RIT score, which means they have the lowest readiness, lowest level readiness. I always ask teachers to look at that name. Are you surprised? Typically we're not really, we saw that coming usually, right? Like we go, yeah, I can see that, I get it. Look at this RIT, it's the number in the middle, it's the bold. You are always given a range, because remember that plus or minus 3 is more than plus or minus 3 is a measurable difference. So within it, that's your range. You are also given the percentile. This student scored in the 16th percentile. If 50th percentile is average, 16th is very low. Now we go to the other end of the list, and your last student on the list is the one with the highest RIT. And again, we're not usually very surprised that that student ended up there, but sometimes we are. Sometimes we go, oh, didn't see that coming. That was a shock. So usually we would say, oh yeah, I see that Stephen, that makes sense. Stephen has a 219 and he's in the 94th percentile. That's very high. That's good. You can see the differentiation in the different goal areas. He was high in literature, high in informational text, and high in vocabulary acquisition. So we need a little bit of time here. We need to go through these individual students and see if we're surprised or any jump out at you, or sometimes the conversation is, now, okay, I know Mary better than Mary must not have tried as hard as Mary could, right? And so those kind of conversations will happen because teachers know you know your students. What I want you to do with our graphic organizer is I want you to identify them. I want you to put names and faces with that readiness. So who is your student with the lowest RIT score? You may want to protect confidentiality and just put DA for Deborah Adams, or you might put Deborah, or you might have a student ID number, however you want to identify them. Put it there, but make sure you have actually made note in your head that this is my student with the lowest RIT score. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that 178 and we're going to go to our chart. And I want to know, what is Deborah ready for? So she's sitting in a third grade classroom. We take that 178 to our chart and we see that Deborah is ready for mid-year second grade. Now this is third grade, so that's not a huge gap. I mean, I'm telling you, we see a lot bigger gaps than one grade level, but good to know. Deborah is sitting in third grade, mid-year. She's ready for mid-year second grade. And so I'm going to put on that line that says this student is scoring like mid-year second grade. I'm going to do the same thing for the other end. I'm going to go, who is the student with the highest RIT? I'm going to put down Stephen. I'm going to look up that 219 in my reading chart, and I find that Stephen is ready for beginning of the year ninth grade. So again, remember, these kids came to us because they're 8. They're all 8 at the beginning of the year. They're in third grade, but they are sitting in the classroom, and I have students that are ready for middle of the year second grade, all the way to beginning of the year ninth grade in reading. So that's pretty academically diverse. What's probably going to happen is when I put Deborah's name and face in my mind with this 178, I may look around right here and go, Edith is really struggling with the same thing, and so is Mary. Really and truly, Mary is struggling with that same thing. I think I'm going to group these 3 right here, and I'm going to have to do some things a little bit different for these 3. And then I look up here at the other end and I go, Stephen and Sarah and Gerald, they all pretty much are working at the same pace. They're really, they're really in tune with each other. I can put them together in a group and I could do some enrichment, or I could go a little bit deeper, or maybe I could use them to help some of these students in the classroom, or maybe they could teach a lesson. Sometimes students learn a lot from their peers. So maybe we could have them do could you prepare a little lesson on this to help your fellow students in your classroom? These are just ideas. This is necessary for us to discuss with our grade alike team so that we can put all of our thoughts together and start to come up with, what could we do? What could this look like? We want to get creative. Something that you could do is maybe if see, this is Barnes' classroom. If another third grade teacher says, you know what, I've got a student that's scoring right here in this range also, maybe we can pull those students together in a group during our RTI time, and we could target those skills and provide some interventions to move them up. We can go meet them where they are and get them ready. And then we can start combining kids from other classes even that have the same readiness level. But this is why the conversations are so important for your grade alike teachers to all be thinking this through together and sharing possibilities and what could we do? What could it look like? Maybe there's some time for enrichment in your RTI schedule. Maybe you can one teacher would take in the enrichment group, and another teacher could take this intervention group, and another teacher could take this intervention group, and you can start to identify them from this information. Just a very powerful tool for us to start talking about how are we going to meet these students' needs. So that's what is available in the clash report. So if we think about what we know from the clash report, we know how the class is performing as a whole. I would suggest that when you give the fall assessment, this is the report I would go to. I would go to this report. I would learn about my group. This is the group that I have this year. This is how they're performing as a whole. And then I want to dig a little deeper, and I want to go, okay, how diverse is my group? Because remember, my average it's just going to be how they're performing as a whole. Now I want to dig down a little bit deeper and go, okay, what does that look like in the individual bands? Where do they fall? And I even want to get a little deeper and think about what's the instructional area? Is there an instructional area where small group is most appropriate? And I'm just going to start. I'm going to start with one in mind. I'm going to get really good at that, and I'm going to start to expand it out to the others. Right? So we can eat this elephant one bite at a time. Gives us a starting point. Is there an instructional area where whole group is appropriate? I now have an idea. I have put readiness levels for the range of abilities in my classroom. Like our example here, I know that my students were ready for mid-year second grade all the way to the beginning of the year ninth grade. It's helpful. That's helpful information that helps me process when I'm planning and preparing and thinking about what I do here is going to have to look different than what I do here. So I know the range of abilities in the class. I'm going to put a name and a face with both extremes, and I'm going to make some decisions about how to address both. There's something about just knowing that this is this child and this is where this child is, and I need to go help this child where they're ready and pull them to where they are. Or I need to help this child grow. I need to help push that child further. Okay, so all that being said, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. This is my contact information. I'm happy to help with any of that. And up next, we're going to look at part 3, which is all about growth. And we'll focus on the quadrant chart. And my suggestion is that happen after your winter assessment. So after the fall, I would go through the data like we just went through with the class report. Then the winter, we'll focus part 3 on that information. So again, if you ever need me, please feel free to reach out with any questions. I'm happy to help at any time, and I hope that you have found this helpful. Thanks.